We have a quorum. I believe we are all hands on deck at this point.
Everyone's here. Okay.
Yes, we can get started at your convenience.
All right, great. Well, recording's on, I believe. So called to order. I'm Steve Brunson, chair of the committee. We do have a quorum, and Jeremy, the press has been notified.
Yes, sir. Press has been notified.
All right, fantastic. So second item would be consideration and approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which was held on May 19th. Does anyone have any questions, suggested changes or anything to those minutes? And if none, if someone could make a motion to approve those minutes. Anyone?
I'll move.
I'll second.
And try to say your name when you.
Matt Wingate seconds.
Okay.
Secretary Johnson moved.
Thank you very much. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, fantastic. Okay, and I lost my agenda, but I believe Jim's the next item on the agenda, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome everybody.
You're welcome.
The agenda item number 3 is just a brief update on some of the stuff goings on here at Kentucky Housing Corporation in the first quarter. This is similar to a presentation I did last August as well. The numbers are not as good this year as they were last year, and I'll explain a little bit about it. But the first section here on this chart is the update on secondary marketing gains. We actually have $732,000 in gains on $150 million of loan volume, which means we're selling the price of the loans at about a dollar, one par plus 49 hundredths of a dollar, which last year was 106 and 95. And so, you know, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I never could understand how they could pay as much for them for last year's trades as they did. But I certainly hope they would be able to pay better than they're paying now for this year's trades. I think something of note, you'll see that the net servicing fee so far this year is 37.5 basis points. That compares to just 30 basis points last year. So we are getting servicing that's worth a little bit more. We're just not getting as much cash for it. Now, some of that is intentional. If you recall, last year we were trying to cash fund as much of this as we could so we could pay off the pension. That bill has been paid, so we're not getting as much cash gains this year, but we are getting paper gains. Not to the extent that we've lost the cash gains to last year, but still a little, it does augment a little bit the $732,000 that we are actually getting on cash gains. The plan for this at this point of the year, and this is through September, was that we'd have $2.5 million of cash gains. Instead, we only have the 732. And you can see in the variance analysis, we're getting a little extra for volume. We're getting a huge decrease in the price. And then, like I said, we're picking up a little bit of, or because we're not selling as much of the service fee, we're keeping it, the service fee buy up and buy down is trailing last year by quite a bit as well. So am I disappointed in this? Yes. You know, we raised our loan prices 4 times Monday and Tuesday. That's how fast the market is moving. You know, we talked to our counterparties, and one said, and I'm quoting his daily missile, these are the days when one opens up the charts each morning and looks at them through splayed fingers. Ugly doesn't even to describe agency mortgage performance this month, elevated volatility, et cetera, et cetera. And it says the central bank has been forced into tightening mode with a dollar that is crumbling like the Phillies bullpen. Now, typically, I don't like sports analogies, but being a Phillies fan for 55 or 60 years, I know how bad their bullpen is, and it crumbles every year. And so it's an excellent analogy, but the market is just extremely difficult to navigate through. Another quote that I got from somebody else that day was, this has become a good old-fashioned rout in the bond market. And so it's extremely difficult to market the loans. We are doing, I think, a very good job of considering the market. the reason for the compression or convexity of bond prices is because everybody seemingly has finally learned their lesson that if you start making 7.5% or 8% loans today and pay up a big premium to get them, they're going to pay off 3 years from now when rates drop down to 4 and everybody refis. And so people have been burned enough times to say, I'm not going to pay up for these. And so we have a market that requires a higher yielding loan and nobody's willing to pay up for it. And so we're seeing that kind of, I call it compression, but it's the same thing as the technical term they use is convexity. And to go from a 6.5 bond to a 7% bond, nobody's willing to pay much more for a 7 than a 6.5. And so we're getting very poor execution. A light part of this, or a better part of this, is in the second section of this chart, servicing portfolio highlights. I do have some prior year numbers out over there in the far right, but the portfolio actually has grown despite all of the payoffs we suffered at the end of calendar 21 and into a little bit of calendar 22. The portfolio has grown from 2.7 billion to 2.8 billion rounded. The growth is coming in the service for others portfolio and at the expense of the indenture. That is deliberate. I think the next chart is really telling that the service for others service fee rate on the service for others is 31.6 basis points compared to 32.5 at this point last year. That's a decrease primarily because of harvesting the cash gains that we did last year. But if you compare that to June of 22, it's a 0.1 basis point increase. And you say 0.1 basis point, big deal. 1 basis point is worth $250,000 of fee income every year. So that small increment is increasing our income by $25,000 per year. And the goal now is, of course, if we delivered 37.5, as shown at the top of this schedule, that weighted average is going to start coming up and we'll start, preserving the annuity stream that we have in the servicing portfolio. And again, let's remember that we were cash hungry up till we paid off the pension. We don't need the cash. Cash is always nice to have, but we don't need the cash, and we can take some of the book income for a little bit better book execution. I think also telling on the state of the servicing portfolio is that the delinquency ratio, if you compare the total delinquents last year of 5.86%, Jeremy, could you scroll down just a little bit on that one, please? There we go. 5.86 to the right on total delinquents. That number now is 4.24%. And that is completely in the 90+ day, dropping from 4.3% to 2.5%. And that is a visual evidence of the end of loan forbearance that was put in place during the pandemic. And as we work those now very, very seriously delinquent loans out by either paying them current with generally FHA dollars or modifying the loans and also paying them current, we're getting rid of a lot of those very seriously delinquent loans. We still have a little ways to go. That 90-day number should be considerably less even than 2.5%. We still have 300 or 400 loans that we're still working through on forbearance. Most of those are coming current, and so you'll see a decrease in the 90-day. It's maybe a small increase in the 30-day as they have been brought current and they're still adjusting to making payments. Then the other direction that a forbearance loan can go, unfortunately, there was also forbearance and a moratorium on referring loans to foreclosure. And so we have a routine, if you will, a number of loans that go to foreclosure. And you can see that last year at the end of the forbearance period, we were at 55.55% foreclosure ratio. Now that has ticked up to 0.79. And I think our historic ratio is in the 0.9 plus area. So we'll see a continuing increase in the foreclosures, but a much more remarkable decrease in the 90-day. Again, the performance of the portfolio from a ratio standpoint, and with that decrease in the ratio is an increase in cash proceeds as we collect those payments from either HUD or the borrower. And so again, the portfolio is bigger and it's stronger and it's yielding a little bit higher servicing fee. So what we're not putting in, or what we're putting in, is not so great from an execution standpoint, but from an annuity site type way of looking at it, we're strengthening the portfolio at a time when we don't necessarily need a whole lot of cash, but we do want the portfolio or the performance of the annuity. Financing plan, I'm required by my rules on the secondary mortgage market purchase program is to give an update on the financing plans. We do not have any intention of issuing bonds. At this point, we don't have any tax exempt bond capacity or bond cap available to us, but we can issue taxable bonds. We are not planning on that, but we are exploring potentially using taxable bonds to help fund our originations rather than having to go to the secondary market where there's the convexity in the bond pricing. There's a number of different alternatives available. We are still getting production, so this is not an emergency where we have to go find someplace else to sell our bonds, but we're looking at alternatives. We can actually put investments that we create in the secondary market and sell them to the debt service reserve in the bond indenture. And so there's a way to do that. We can harvest, if you will, some of the debt service reserve and create capacity in the indenture for loan level bond or loan investments. And then we're also exploring possibly shelving a month of production or 2 months of production. That would be unhedged, which I do not recommend, but shelving it and financing it with lines of credit until the conditions in the market are a little bit more agreeable. That does violate one of our basic tenets of not speculating on interest rates, and we're not to that point of needing to. So we're keeping the ship afloat, moving forward, creating good value, just not having a whole lot of income to reflect what we're doing. And anybody that wants to trade places with me or Tracy Thurston and try to market and sell loans into this market, you're certainly welcome, because I have not in my 40-year career. Now, 40 years ago, yeah, it was pretty ugly too in the early 80s, but this is a very, very difficult bond market and financial market to have to navigate through. So I think Tracy's doing a great job of getting these trades executed. We are settling the trades the way we're supposed to, and everything is mechanically working well. It's just that the market's not real cooperative. That's the extent of my presentation, Mr. Chairman. Any questions?
Thank you, Jim. Does any member of the committee have any questions for Jim? All right. Hearing none, I do not believe you're not presenting anything, submitting anything, so I don't believe we need a motion of any kind.
That's correct. That's an information only.
Okay. So moving on to the next item, the audited financial statements for the year. Most of us know Kristen, but for those who don't, Kristen McDonough, she's partner with Crow LLP. And she'll make the presentation. I believe her associate Brad may have been scheduled to attend as well, but may have gotten detained. So Kristen, if you're out there, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And I see we have the financial statements pulled up. Always appreciate Jim's comments to start the presentation. And no, I do not want to trade places with Jim or Tracy, as they probably don't want to trade places with me either, though. So we'll just continue to play in our lanes here. With the financial statements last year, there was just a lot of moving pieces with respect to new standards that were adopted, new programs that the entity was entering into. You had the pension kind of cessation, as well as you had kind of the beginnings of a lot of this kind of changing evolution in the mortgage markets. This year is a little bit calmer, but you will see a lot of those same items play out. And so I do want to point your attention to those on a couple of pages within the financial statements here. If we could fast forward to page 7 of 51, this is going to be, so one more page forward. There we go. Okay, so this will be the draft of our audit opinion. We do anticipate issuing an unqualified or unmodified audit opinion that indicates that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. So in layperson's terms, we did not post any audit adjustments. We actually did not even propose any audit adjustments to these financial statements. We conducted our procedures in accordance with U.S. GAAP as well as government accounting standards, and did not find any irregularities within our audit. Your management team does prepare these financial statements. They enter into transactions throughout the year. They're recording those transactions on the general ledger, and then our role is to come in and audit those through samples, through confirmation with customers, through kind of performing a test basis, and also in reviewing the standards, those government accounting standards that the entity has used to to record these transactions. So the next page is going to kind of outline some of our procedures. We do exercise professional judgment throughout the extent of these procedures, but we did not find any issues. There are some supplemental schedules that the next 2 pages describe. So we are performing this audit. We're also performing an audit over the single audit, so your schedule of expenditures of federal awards, as well as we do some audits of the Ginnie Mae supplemental schedules that are also included. If you'll turn to page, I believe it should be 10 of 51. Yes, one more page forward. Okay. This is the beginning of the financial statements. The financial statements is really split into kind of 3 components. You've got management's discussion and analysis, which is authored by your management team, that really describes kind of the changes year over year that the entity experienced. And when we point out a few of those items, this is non-audited information, but we do review this information to ensure that it's in alignment with the audited results. Then you have your audited financial statements, which will draw your attention to. And finally, there's the notes and supplemental schedules. The financial highlights is really going to describe a lot of what Jim just covered with respect to kind of the growth in the corporation over the year, the single family loan originations, those loan originations that are within the servicing portfolio versus those that are held on the balance sheet, as well as there's 2 items in here also that are covered. First is just the impact related to the government activities of kind of that full year of COVID relief or CARES Act funding that was administered by the organization. And we'll be able to see that in some of the government statements, where you can see really just how much more funding really ran through the organization and how much was needed to be administered by the organization this year compared to some prior years. And then finally, that last bullet right there is talking through that final payment to the pension. So based on accounting standards, there was an estimate that was done at the end of June 30, 2021 to estimate the amount of that liability, and that was then recorded in full on the balance sheet. As the payment of that came in, it was actually with a little bit less than the liability, so the corporation was able to recapture about $4 million, and then there was some offsetting interest expense that was paid. So that's going to really drive a lot of the financial results. Like if you're looking at kind of year over year, you'll see that expenses are actually down or up quite a bit this year, and that has to do with a lot of that pension reporting. But we'll show that. I'll point that out on some of the particular tables. If you go to page 13 of 51, this is the first statement of activities table that I think is helpful. It's split between the government and the business type activities. So your government activities is going to be that federal funding component. You can really see the operating grants, 401 million versus that 251 million in the previous year. So that's funding from the federal government that came through the entity that was then largely spent in the rental assistance and eviction relief, and then some of the other federal and state programs. And you can see how much that eviction relief funding really increased from 42 million in the previous year to 180 million this year. So really just a very dynamic program, a lot of relief that was given to individuals within the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You can also see on the operating revenues, some of the operating revenue pressure on the business type activities that Jim was mentioning. You're seeing in that number some of that decrease on the gross gains on loans that are sold into the secondary market. You probably also have some declines in the securities portfolio, because as interest rates continue to rise, a lot of the securities that are held by the organization are at lower rates, which then causes some unrealized losses to be evident in that portfolio as well. I'll point you to some things that we evaluated to ensure that those losses are not long-term, not losses that would need to be realized, but they're really just some timing differences. And then you can see down at the bottom, you've got your total program expenses to 2022 versus 2021. The reason why that's increased in 22 versus 21 is because when the pension liability was recorded in 21, the amount to get out of the pension was actually less than the pension liability that had previously been recorded on the books. So I know that sounds really odd, but that's what's driving that $19 million decrease. And so that was really more of a one-time thing that happened in 21, whereas the 22 expenses are probably more sustainable and what you would anticipate seeing going forward. From there, I'd like to go to page 16 of 51. This is table 3. This is providing just a little bit more in depth on sort of the business type activities on the statement of the statement of financial position. So this is going to be the balance sheet. So you can see that we have sort of that continued decline in the mortgage loans and real estate loans. Those are the loans that would be held on balance sheet as those continue to pay down. That's a trend that we've seen for many years as more loans are now being sold to the secondary market. And then you also see that net pension and OPEB payable liability of $90 million in 21 that has now been fully paid out in 22. Turning to the next page. Great. So here again, you're going to see some of the decrease in the gains on loans held for sale. I don't want to sound like a broken record, so I won't be pointing that out in every stage. I think it's helpful here just to again see kind of the further breakdown of the income statement for those business type activities. You also do see that increase or decrease in the fair value of securities. So it was a decrease of 1.7 million last year, 12.8 million this year. We are seeing this across the industry. As again, you just have security pricing that is, as we're seeing in the stock market, but we're also seeing in the bond market as well. We don't anticipate that any of that is related to true credit concerns. And so at this same time, I believe that is just a temporary change in the value of those securities. If you go to page 21, this is going to be I guess I glossed over the 2 pages before page 21 of 51 are really the management's team financial outlook. I think that's helpful to read for the committee. Those are more forward-looking statements. They're going to be talking about 23, 24, a lot of the headwinds that the organization is facing with respect to interest rates, continued government funding, geopolitical pressures, and so that's really talking about everything in the aftermath of COVID that could provide disruption to the organization. We do see the financial industry continuing to just be very tumultuous in this aftermath of COVID. And if you talk to 17 economists, none of them will agree as to the whys, but they'll all agree that we're in sort of an unprecedented time. And I think that's kind of what the financial outlook there is reflecting as well. This is your statement of financial position. So the balance sheet of the organization is broke down between your government type activities, the business type activities. It is notable on here that this is a single year presentation, so there's no disclosure of pension expense or liability currently on. There is one item that was new last year, and so I do want to point out again this year, it's within the liabilities, and it's called unearned pass-through branch revenue. This line item, that 162 million, those are funds that have been received either from the federal government or from the state in advance of programmatic expenses that will be paid to participants of the program. So typically what happens is you will receive the organization will expend government funds and then they'll be reimbursed for those funds. With a lot of the CARES Act and the COVID funding, the funding actually took place in the reverse of that, where the funds were pushed to the agencies and then the agencies spent from those funds. So that does create a liability in the time when the agency is holding those funds, but before they've been spent to individuals within the Commonwealth. So just a slight reporting difference than you would have seen in previous years, as that's not really the most common practice. I would say most common may be making it sound like it's reported incorrectly. It is not. It's just a difference that the federal government has done to try to get those COVID funding to agencies in advance of when they would actually be spending them. So that's just sort of a difference in the philosophy there, not really a difference in how those are reported or how they were reported in the past. Page 30 of 51. So I'm going to skip through some of these individual schedules. All these individual schedules here are providing more detail versus those in the financial highlights. Financial highlights are a little bit easier to decipher and distinguish the changes. These funds right here, the 61 million, these are funds held in escrow. So for the loan accounts that are either being serviced by the organization or held by the organization, these are the property taxes, the insurance, the other escrowed funds that are sitting within the cash accounts at KHC, but are actually for the benefit of those mortgage holders. There was a new standard last year that required these funds to be separately stated. So again, this is just a single year balance sheet here for those funds, but just wanted to point it out because it was still relatively new. Page 32 of 51 begins the notes of the financial statements. There were no significant new changes to these notes or new accounting standards that were adopted this year. There was a new accounting standard with respect to leases. This was also seen in the private sector about a year earlier, where institutions or companies are required to place their leases on balance sheet, right? So then you would be able to compare the fixed assets of an entity that leases properties versus an entity that owns properties, and those would now look very similar. The organization did adopt this standard, but it was extremely minimal, less than about a $250,000 adjustment as a result of that. So that was deemed to be a very immaterial standard, which is why you don't really see it showing up here in the financial statements. Next, I'm going to go to page 38 of 51. As I mentioned, there you do have some of those unrealized declines in your securities portfolio. I think it is helpful to see here that the entity, these are the types of investments that you are currently invested in. They are all in a high investment grade rating. That is something that we audit as well. So I think it's helpful and comforting for the committee to see that. Page 40 of 51, at the very bottom of this page is going to show that snapshot of those loans that are being serviced by the organization but are not on the balance sheet. Jim pointed to this in his numbers and figures during his presentation as well. The average balance of these loans last year would have been about 110,000. This year is about 115,000. So a lot of that is you're going to see kind of the payoff of some previous loans and the refinancing, just a modest increase in the balance of those loans. But while the numbers look individually on this page very large, they're made up of many individual borrowers and relatively smaller balance loans. The final thing that I wanted to point out was on page 45 of 51. And this is going to be where the pension disclosures last year would have started. So last year and the year before. So last year, a lot of the disclosures were pulled years before. You probably had 6 to 7 pages that in depth describe the pension as well as the OPEB benefits and how those were constructed through the Commonwealth. That has now been replaced. Those disclosures have been removed. You have the disclosures surrounding the defined contribution plan. I also want to point out on this page that there are no subsequent events that had to be disclosed within these financial statements. As I stated, we are also performing the audit over the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Each year, we look at the major programs. There's a rotating schedule of how these programs need to be tested. We tested 6 programs this year. That would be the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, Homeowners Assistance, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program under the CARES Act, Weatherization, and then Mortgage Insurance Home, and the Veterans Housing Guaranteed and Insurance Loan Programs. We test those based on the required testing schedule provided to us by the federal government, and did not have any exceptions with respect to the compliance or control aspects of those programs. We did identify some changes within the schedule of expenditures of federal awards that we did ask management to make changes on it, and did have some recommendations with respect to internal controls around that schedule that could be enhanced going forward, but that would be the only deficiency items that would need to be discussed with this committee. With that, we had, as I mentioned earlier, no posted or waived adjustments. There are estimates within the financial statements. I tried to point those out to you as we were going through. Those estimates are subject to a little bit more audit risk. They're not as black and white. The management team's making a judgment call. We spend more time looking at those. We try to include some of our more experienced resources when we're looking at those areas as well, just to make sure that we're challenging if that would be necessary. But we did not have any issues with those with which to report. No disagreements with management as I kind of go through some of the other standard items. And as always, we had a lot of new team members to thank this year, but Mike and Tracy have really fallen into their roles very well. We've done most of our inquiries, the two of them. They were very helpful to the whole audit process, as was Jim, Kevin, the rest of the team. So definitely want to thank everyone. I'm happy to take any questions. I know I went through that relatively quickly, but I know the committee, Jim keeps you guys informed as what's going on throughout the year as well from a finance perspective, but I'm happy to take any questions that the committee members may have.
Thank you, Kristen. Does any member of the committee have any questions for Kristen? Okay, hearing none, then do need to have Jeremy remove all management temporarily so that the committee and Crow can have a private conversation. And
Recording in
Okay, everyone
progress.
is back.
all right, thank you, Jeremy. In committee, we do need a motion and a second and a vote on the audited financials statements as presented by Kristen. Can I get a motion, please?
Holly, I'll move.
Holly, thank you. And a second.
Gail, I second.
Gail's a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you all very much. Any other informational items that anyone might like to bring forward, board or staff members? Okay, hearing none, I have no information. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jim. I'd like to say that or comment on how professional the auditor, management, and staff relationship is, and that there was very little back and forth, not unfriendly back and forthing between us and the audit team. And doing all this virtually is very difficult for those of us who are accustomed to face-to-face, but everything got done. It got done quickly and on time, and I think that's a tribute to both sides.
Very nice comments and well noted and recorded. Thanks, Jim. Okay, no other items, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
This Holly, I'll move.
And a second.
I'll second, Isaac.
Thank you, Isaac. All right. Thank you both. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.